Throughout time, roller coasters have come and gone. Only some become legends for their intensity and thrills. Each and every year, coaster fans like you venture to the parks, searching for that one special ride that stands out above the rest. You submitted your rankings, and now it's time to reveal the group of elite roller coasters that you have voted as the best of the best. COASTER-net Uncut is proud to present the 2022 Coaster Rumble.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the thrilling 32. It's the steel coasters this week, Andy. It's the Coaster Rumble, the thrilling 32 Coaster Rumble. Last week, we talked about the wood coasters. We got our field of 32 down to 16, and then our 16, we ranked those within their groups down to 4. This week, we're doing the same with the steel coasters, and it's appropriate, Andy, because as of our recording here, again, we're recording these ahead of time, these first few shows. We're still getting submissions in, some good ones, some not so good ones. But Andy, appropriate that hopefully in just a couple of days, we will be, we being COASTER-net will be riding Iron Gwazi, which is one of the most anticipated rides for next year that we expect to see in next year's Thrilling 32. So very appropriate tonight that we're going through the first two rounds of the
and many people thought they were going to see it in this year's Thrilling
and the year before. Iron Gwazi was, now spoiler alert here for the general awards, which at some point we'll reveal the results of that. But Iron Gwazi narrowly edged out by Pantheon for most anticipated ride of 2022, which we won't even get into that because I don't really understand that. But Iron Gwazi was on that ballot, that question on the ballot for 3 consecutive years. That is hard to do.
That's hard to do. That's unless you're flying turns. So.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's hard to potentially win most anticipated ride for 3 or 4 years in a row.
That's not easy. That's not an easy one to do.
No.
But in any case, we are here tonight to talk about some steel coasters.
Some rides that have opened.
Some
of which started being built after Iron Gwazi was done.
Well, yeah, a couple of them here. So I forgot how we did this last. Oh yeah, so we do this. We put the groups up. We narrow it down to 4, and then we rank them, and then we will come out of this with our final 4 at the end. This was the side, I think, that gave a lot of people pause, that they really had to think about. One, what coasters were first moving on. That in some of these groupings, that was always not a given, figuring out all 4 coasters. And then the rankings, oh man, people were cursing you during that selection show for sure.
They were, and you know, we talked about it last year when we debuted the Coaster Rumble. You know, the wood coasters, you know, generally speaking, you don't get a lot of new wood coasters each year. Our wood coaster field tends to be, you know, most of the same rides. We might have 2 or 3 that shift around and fall out and come back in, but generally those are not the ones in contention for top 10, top 15 spots. And you kind of know how those are going to go. Whereas the steel coasters, we always got a lot of new steel coasters. We got a lot of new people riding different rides that they haven't ridden before, that they're adding to their coaster counts and adding to their rankings. So, you know, there's a lot more movement with the steel coasters, not only with the rankings themselves, but which rides are coming in and out of the tournament. And, you know, we talked about the wood coasters last week. 31 of the 32 coasters, the same as last year with the first Coaster Rumble. The Beast dropping out and Texas Stingray coming in. That's the only difference between the field itself on the wood coaster side of things. But this year on the steel coasters, completely different. 9 rides fell out. 9 rides came in. Some rides that have been around for a while that are just getting more riders, but some rides that were new for 2021. You know, such as Fly, such as Ride to Happiness, such as Velocicoaster. You know, those rides that some of them were expected to be here, some of them not. But here they are. So, you know, in the selection show, I think a lot of people felt pretty good about the wood coasters. The challenge with wood coasters has always been trying to predict the minute changes, because we don't see a lot of big changes from year to year in the wood coasters. We can't say that for the steel coasters. We've seen some steel coasters move 10 or more spots, either up or down, in a single year. And then throw in the fact that you've got 9 coasters, most of which have never been in the Thrilling 32 before. A ride like Zadra, for example, it's been around a couple of years and people have been waiting for it to show up here. And now it finally does. And we have no idea where it's going to be. It could be a top 5 ride. It could be barely into the Thrilling 32. We have no idea. So we'll start to get some clarity on that here this evening. But this is reflected in the submissions too. Generally speaking, the scores for the steel coaster half of a lot of our bracket submissions so far are not very good.
That's not surprising, because I think there's a lot of question marks, like I said, in these groupings, and just also with all these new coasters that have been added. I think there's a lot of question marks. So let's jump right into it here, I think.
All right. Yeah. Well, we'll jump right into it. And we're starting with the Kernex group. And the 8 coasters that we saw here were Goliath from Walibi Holland over in the Netherlands. We've got Hyperion from Energylandia in Poland. We had Leviathan in Canada's Wonderland, Millennium Force from Cedar Point, Smiler from Alton Towers, Steel Vengeance from Cedar Point, and then the 2 big steel coasters from Six Flags New England being Superman the Ride and Wicked Cyclone. And, obviously, Steel Vengeance is the undefeated defending champion, 3 times, all 3 times it's been in, has never lost a head-to-head matchup, has never, obviously been eliminated in the Coaster Rumble format here. So trying to do it again, we've got another Cedar Point ride in Millennium Force, Leviathan, a former champion, Superman, a former champion under the Bizarro moniker. And then you've got some other rides like Wicked Cyclone, who's never advanced past the first round in any format of this tournament in the 9 previous years that we've been doing it. And then you got a couple European rides, one of which being Hyperion, its first time ever in here. So, there's a lot of variation in how well ridden some of these rides are, how long the history goes back here. So really just a lot of uncertainty, really, aside from the fact maybe that Steel Vengeance is the one coming out of this region, right? I mean, is that the only certainty here?
I think, honestly, that is the only certainty, is that Steel Vengeance is probably coming out of the region, probably going to be number 1 amongst this group.
So you're not giving any credence to Hyperion knocking it out?
No, not at all. I'm not an idiot. But
yeah, we've started, folks.
I've started already. After that fact, after you have established that Steel Vengeance is moving on to your final 4 at the very least, after that, there is nothing on this page that jumps out at me. That you have Leviathan and Millennium Force. Leviathan was a former champion. Millennium Force is one of those rides in this poll that never does well. Smiler is always kind of in the middle. Yeah. Superman the Ride used to be on top, but it's slowly been dropping. Goliath and Hyperion, we don't really have any basis for whatsoever. But by all intents, most people say they're both really good rides.
Goliath has kind of been like sneaky good. That's a phrase me and my buddy use sometimes about sneaky good theme park days when you think it might be busy and it's not. Goliath is kind of in like sneaky good, like 18 to 22 range. Like maybe you'd give it a chance to move on.
Yeah, I think maybe the one certainty I would take from this is Steel Vengeance moving on. I think Wicked Cyclone not moving on would be my other.
That's it. Well, and you're not a Wicked Cyclone. No, you're not a Superman fan either.
No, but I know Superman occasionally does well, I feel like, in this poll. Does it? I can't even remember anymore.
The last couple of years, maybe not so much.
But. Not so much in the last few years, but it used at one point it did really well. Like at one point.
I mean, former champion, right? I mean, there's 3 former or current champions in this region.
So like I'm just looking at I gotta open up my steel list.
This was like 20s last year.
Yeah, which is right there. So like you have Superman the Ride was a 21. Wicked Cyclone. Where's Wicked? Millennium Force was 15. Wicked Cyclone was 13 last year. Maybe I want to rescind my comment.
You're rethinking, are you?
Who the hell is voting for Wicked Cyclone? Is this for real? Like this? That's got to be a misprint. Hold on,
People like Wicked Cyclone.
Well, I question those people. I really do. Wicked Cyclone. Wicked Cyclone was 20.
Hundreds of voters, are you?
Oh, well, yeah, that's what I do best, Danny Miller. So Wicked Cyclone was 23 2 years ago, which is still way too high, but still within the realm of possibility. So Wicked Cyclone did make a significant jump in the 2020 poll. 2018, Wicked Cyclone was 19. So it's always in those 20s, it seems. And it made a little bit of a jump last year, which I don't know, seems really strange to me, but okay, whatever.
All right. Well, the 4 rides moving on to the second round in this group are Leviathan, Millennium Force, Steel Vengeance, and Wicked Cyclone. So we've knocked out Goliath. We've knocked out Hyperion, which was a popular choice for folks to pick to move on. People thinking Hyperion might do better than it ultimately has here, and we've knocked out Smiler and Superman the Ride. So now we're down to
Danny. I'm gonna do something that is unprecedented.
Uh-oh.
And not only maybe Thrilling 32 history, but maybe in COASTER-net history. And I'm gonna side with the European folks on this one.
Oh my God, folks! Stop the presses! Stop.
You guys got screwed on this one because there is no way that Wicked Cyclone is better than Hyperion. I don't know about Goliath, but I can tell you, I'm critical thinking once again. I've watched movies of Hyperion, and there is no way that it is better than Hyperion.
So I think Goliath for me was in like Magnum XL 200 territory. Because it had a couple of good hills at the beginning. It's got some turns and whatnot that are okay in the middle. And then it's got a really, really nice finishing run of like 2 or 3 really strong airtime hills at the end. I think I ranked them very similarly.
Yeah, there's been an invasion of justice in this grouping here. So, but now we have to rank these rides.
So now we've got to rank these rides, which is interesting. Again, perhaps maybe not perhaps, but Leviathan, Millennium Force, Steel Vengeance, and Wicked Cyclone. Steel Vengeance kind of like a sore thumb. Hyperion was kind of the question mark because you didn't know where that was going to be. You didn't know if that would really debut at a really, really high spot. The new rides tend to do well, especially in their first year in the tournament. So Hyperion was kind of the question mark, right?
Well, I got news for you. If you went back to your 2020 Steel Top 50, it helps you none because Wicked Cyclone was 13. Leviathan was 14 and Millennium Force was 15.
So now all of a sudden our evil plan of how we set this group up has come to fruition, right? Because if you went back to last year, as Andy said, it helps you none.
No, unless you're going to assume that they're going to fall in the same way.
Well, and what was the ranking last year?
Oh, I can't even remember now. It was Wicked Cyclone, Leviathan, Millennium Force.
In that order from okay, so really the only thing that you were certain of potentially here is Steel Vengeance being the top one. The other 3 good luck, and those are 2 points apiece. There's 6 points on the line with those 3. And again, assuming that you picked all 3 of those, which I can tell you, very few people had all 3 of those going.
Now, to add one more layer onto that, Wicked Cyclone came in at a 95.79. Leviathan was a 95.68. Millennium Force was a 95.55. And
so minute differences here.
Minute differences. Like you're talking about like a handful of ballots, if that.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't even know. There's no sense in even guessing at this point.
I was going to say, do you even have a guess?
No, I don't. There's what's the sense? Besides, Wicked Cyclone should even be here. So let's.
Okay. All right. So the rankings for this group coming in 4th, Millennium Force.
What's wrong with me?
Coming in third is where we see Wicked Cyclone. Coming in second, Leviathan, and no surprise to anybody, Steel Vengeance winning the Kernex group. Steel Vengeance going to the Final Four, remains undefeated here. So
What?
people's brackets are in shambles already, and we're one group in. Last year, we started the Steel bracket with the Intamin group. We had all 8 Intamins in the same group. This year, it was not 8 Intamins, but it was probably just as, if not more, challenging.
I don't even know what to say here. Besides, in what world is Wicked Cyclone better than Millennium Force? In what world, I ask you? In what world is that ride better than Millennium Force?
In Thrilling 32, February 2022.
And last year too, actually. So
well, yeah.
So really the only thing that happened different from last year is Leviathan jumped Wicked Cyclone. Either slightly or by a lot, but Wicked Cyclone, Millennium Force was in third out of those 3 last year too. So
true. I won't spoil where they finish, but I will say that they are not in 3 consecutive spots.
Oh, interesting.
So we'll see in a couple of weeks when we reveal the champions on both the steel and wood, and then of course the contest winner as well. Part of that show at the end, of course, is the top 50 rankings, both wood and steel. So we will eventually see where they all ranked, but this is the order that they ranked, at least relative to one another. In this group. So Steel Vengeance going on to the Final Four once again. So shall we move on to the Bollinger group, where it was just another slew of new rides that have never been here before, right?
And that's really the problem too, is that with all these new rides, it's so hard to judge where they're going to eventually fall. Maybe next year this becomes easier if all these rides are still in. I don't know.
Well, and that'll be another question mark, but we got a lot of good new, supposed to be good new rides opening up this coming year too.
You're going to have just a different problem, I think.
Right. I mean, you would assume Iron Gwazi's going to be in, perhaps Pantheon gets in, there might be a few others that might find their way in, but.
Forget it when the Job Squad takes a trip to Scandinavia. So.
And that's true. That 2023, all bets are off. There might be 32 new coasters here. We'll have a new number 1.
When I leave, Jeff can take it over.
The Helix is going to be number 1 from now on. All right, so in the Bollinger group, we've got Fly from Fantasialand, new for 2021. We got Fury 325, 2-time former champion in 2015 and 2017. Iron Rattler from Fiesta Texas. Mako from SeaWorld Orlando, one of the survivors of the B&M Hypercoaster Exodus. The Ride to Happiness from Plopsaland de Pan, I think it's the name of the park in Belgium. Shambhala from Portaventura Park in Spain, Skyrush from Hershey Park, one that Andy's actually fucking heard of, and Zadra from Energylandia. We had some predictions during the live chat of the selection show that we would see an Energylandia ride get in, and lo and behold, 2 of them got in here with Zadra. So, you thought the last group was bad because we had a couple of, different rides, a new ride that had never been in before. Not only do we have rides that have never been in before, like Zadra, but we've got Fly and Ride to Happiness, which were new, obviously never been in before. Shambhala, it's been a couple of years since it's been in the Thrilling 32. And then we've got rides that have, a very, very deep history, like Fury, Iron Rattler, Mako, and then Skyrush, but Skyrush's deep history is kind of shrouded in mystery because it's been very good. It's been very, very bad.
Well, yeah, and that's the problem is you have well-established rides with Fury and Iron Rattler, and I would just keep laughing because of the glow you put around Fury makes it look like the McFlurry logo that they used for the McDonald's campaign. Because it has like a nice like lime green outline around it. So it's just I just keep thinking of the McFlurry 325. Anyway, but I think you can take to the bank that Fury's moving on here. I think that
can you see this? Can you see this over here? I don't know if once you do the editing whether or not but we've got a very nice Fury 325.
Oh, look at that. Yeah, absolutely. It's a nice magnet.
It's a nice sparkly blue base too. So
I like that one. That's a good
members of the Patreon that get the magnets. That's one that's may not be too far off here, especially if it were to pull off an upset this year.
Well, so I think you can take Fury to the bank here. Iron Rattler, I feel, is like one of those that's really deeply entrenched inside this bowl.
It's like always 9, 10, or 11.
Yeah.
Like if you go back 5 or 6 years, it's been in one of those 3 spots.
Yeah, I feel like it's never in the top 5, but it's always in the discussion of the top 10. So I feel like that's one you can take to the bank. And then outside of that, Skyrush is that question mark, right? Because Skyrush, we've been seeing that resurgence of Skyrush over the last few years. Last year we saw it move up to number 5. We call it the Candemonium effect. So the question is, with Skyrush, does Skyrush maintain that momentum that it obviously gained last year, ranking at number 5? 2019, Skyrush was at 16. So it jumped from 16 to 5. So that's a huge jump that you usually don't see, that kind of jump in the Thrilling 32 like that. We've seen it happen. Like we talked about Wicked Cyclone doing that. So we see it.
We've seen rides jump 8 or 10 spots, but not usually into the top 5.
Not into the top 5. Like it jumps from the mid to the outside of the top 10, something like that.
The only time that I can recall that happening in the past was when G-Force went from 11 to 5 one year, but that was because of ridership too.
And I feel like Nemesis did that too. Did Nemesis like jump when you guys wrote it?
Well, Nemesis, after we wrote it, it actually jumped down because there were some very mixed reviews of Nemesis. It was a top 5 ride, and then it dropped into like the teens. And, now it's been a little bit closer to the top 10. But, the whole Skyrush discussion is, are people actually really liking Skyrush now, or was last year the outlier?
Well, I'll be honest. I don't know why people never rank Skyrush highly to begin with. It like I know that sometimes the restraints could be uncomfortable on the brake run, but I've always thought Skyrush is a top 10 ride. I have it in my top 5, so it's never not been a top tier elite roller coaster that should be talked about when you talk about the 10 best roller coasters in the world. I always thought it was criminally underranked. So it being in the top 5, I believe is its correct placement. But I don't know if that was just an outlier, if that was a one-year deal. I tend to think it wasn't, because like we look at Wicked Cyclone, if we want to use the Wicked Cyclone example, we see it jump and we now see it maintaining. So I think the voters have spoken, and incorrectly there, and hopefully correctly in the Skyrush realm.
Okay.
And for the rest of them, I have no idea. That
I was going to say, we've talked about them. So what do you make of these new rides?
I think Shambhala is one of those that's always just happy to be here. Mako's one of those that's always happy to just be here, and Mako sometimes can win matchups depending on who it's with. But I think those two you can bounce. I'm really interested to see Fly and Zadra. I don't know about Ride to Happiness. I think Ride to Happiness is going to have the Hyperion effect, where
the Ride to the direct correlation from Ride to Happiness is Time Traveler, right? Because
and I think that in my 20s. So like, yeah.
Fly, Fly is interesting because it doesn't really have a direct comparison, right? Because the level of theming, you've got the level of theming there that's really hasn't been seen on a lot of big coasters. Terran across the park is maybe one of the closest comparisons there.
Even Terran critical thinkers have a hard time because there's not really a great point of view that you can watch, like a park produced. Like you can find stuff, but
it's a lot of it's off ride because they have like metal detectors and stuff from what we've heard. So, unless the park provides a POV, which I don't know if they have or not.
I believe they have not. And so
we're not really going to get one, are we?
And even critical thinkers then can't really accurately judge this. So I don't know.
You might need to watch more than one video, God forbid.
You can, but you're still off-ride is never, I always, because even when Velocicoaster came out, I was very hesitant to call Velocicoaster an amazing ride when we saw the off-ride. I said, I think it's going to be pretty good. Once you see that POV, though, you kind of have a really good, unless they speed it up like Wicked Cyclone does, where they made it seem like you're
well, and we talked about that a while back. We talked about that, and you and me were very, very not sold on Velocicoaster when we first saw off-ride video.
Yeah.
And then we saw the POV, and that was the turning point. There were two things that were the turning point for Velocicoaster and the hype level.
No, I think you're talking about Steel Vengeance right now. You're not talking about Velocity. You're talking about Steel Vengeance.
Steel Vengeance was Steel Vengeance, we didn't see a lot of off-ride. And then we saw the POV combined with the RPOV of Tony Clark. Yeah. And that's when we were like, okay, this thing looks like it's maintaining its speed. This could really be something. Velocicoaster, I recall being admittedly very unimpressed.
You were very unimpressed. I was moderately impressed. I still had reservations, but I was more impressed than you were.
I was reasonably unimpressed, and I said the only saving grace is the only, I guess, the positive I took out of it was the off-ride fly around type video on Terran doesn't look overly impressive. No. And yet Terran does still deliver some really nice forces. And I said with Velocicoaster, it may be the same thing because you're sitting up very high and perhaps the maneuvers are done in just the right type of way that they provide a good amount of force. Then the regular POV came, and Velocicoaster isn't even this group, but we're bringing it full circle here because we're gonna see it in a few minutes here. But then the on-ride POV of Velocicoaster came out, and my entire mood changed at that point. I said, okay, you know what? That looks like it might actually be something. I'm excited for this ride again. And then the other turning point for me was when we saw the statues of the two raptors that were supposed to be, the homage to Dueling Dragons, and how the stall element, went, there was that same view there. And that to me said, okay, they actually put some effort and some thought into this, especially with the theme and the queue did not disappoint. And I said, I'm actually confident now that this might be one of the best ride experiences in the world, and it was from queue to getting off the ride. It was. So that was sort of the turning point for me. Now, talk about rides that you and me can only judge with POVs at this point. Let's talk about Zadra, because during the selection show, we speculated that perhaps Zadra would be maybe an early indication of where we might expect to see Iron Gwazi come in next year, because the lengths are very similar, the heights and speeds are very similar, the type of elements that it has and some of the maneuvers, not a lot of straight up airtime hills. On either of those rides, a lot of the twists and turns, unlike Steel Vengeance, which has a lot of the airtime hills and speed bumps, double ups, double downs, the bunny hops at the end, neither Zadra nor Iron Gwazi have those type of elements. So for me, as someone who's going to ride Iron Gwazi hopefully next week, and by the way, follow the Twitter and Instagram and Facebook for all the updates from there, even after we go to it. But as someone who's going to ride that in a couple weeks, Iron Gwazi seems to me to be an indication of what Zadra might be like. So I'm kind of looking at it the other way, but we're looking at it here. Zadra to me might be an early indication of how people might predict where Iron Gwazi ends up next year once we get the final rankings this year.
And I will say the one thing to give me pause is how Hyperion did not move forward. And I'm wondering if that's going to be an indicator that Zadra 2 might not be moving forward here. Because I'm assuming that the people who rode Hyperion probably rode Zadra.
You would think the ridership would be nearly identical, if not exactly.
You would think so. But then again, people could have Hyperion ranked much lower than Zadra 2. In those rankings.
And to be fair, the folks that we know who have been over there, in the Discord and what have you, they have Zadra ranked higher.
So interesting. Well, that's the only wild card here. I think you can take Fury and Iron Rattler to the bank, and probably Skyrush too. And I think it's a game.
You're going to take Skyrush?
I think I would.
Okay.
I based on what happened in Wicked Cyclone, I don't see Skyrush dropping out here.
Okay. So would you take Zadra as your fourth one then, or are you going off the board with one of the other oddballs? I mean, Mako's not really an oddball, but you're not a big Mako fan.
I think it's a toss-up between Fly and Zadra for your fourth spot.
All right. Well, then we'll start with the easy ones here. Moving on from the Bollinger group, we've got Fury 325 and Iron Rattler. We also have Skyrush moving on. So those three, you're spot on there. The last one moving on from this group is Zadra. So we do have Zadra moving on from this group.
Interesting.
Now, to be fair, that does not mean it ranked higher than Hyperion.
No, what? No, it doesn't. It doesn't at all.
So now we've got to rank Fury, Iron Rattler, Skyrush, and Zadra. Now, all of a sudden, this becomes a reasonably difficult task. In the last group, you knew Steel Vengeance was number one in all likelihood, and the other three were very difficult. Now there's a little bit of a discussion here because I think most people probably still going to put Fury at the top.
Yeah.
But knowing Zadra's here, knowing how these RMCs do in their first year, Outlaw Run, rides like Lightning Rod, rides like Steel Vengeance, all RMC coasters that have won in their first year in the tournament. So now all of a sudden, are you considering Zadra to pull off an upset and actually go to the Final Four here?
No.
And no. Okay. So then the other discussion here, Skyrush last year, number 5, but has a very troubled history aside from, a couple of good years, but then also being down in the teens. Knowing the consistency of Iron Rattler being 9, 10, 11, and that there's not a lot of wiggle room for Skyrush to fall in order for it to now be below Iron Rattler. What are you doing about those two? And now the added complexity of where Zadra falls in the middle of all this, because it's very possible that Zadra could, split the difference between some of these.
Well, and that's the big question. I think your Fury, Skyrush, Iron Rattler, I think that's going to stay pretty stable. I'm not going to say that they're going to come in at the exact same numbers that they did last year, but I think that order is probably correct. The question is, does Zadra slide in between any of those? That it could easily slide in between Skyrush and Iron Rattler. It could easily slide in between, if Skyrush drops, between Skyrush and Fury.
Who rides in this poll do well.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, you don't know, is Skyrush going to be number 5 again? That's the big question, because if Skyrush is number 5, then I think the easy answer is that Zadra goes below Skyrush, and then you got to decide between Iron Rattler and Zadra.
Well, Skyrush is 8, and then Iron Rattler is always 9, 10, or 11. There's not a lot of room for Zadra to be in between them.
Well, there's not a lot of room for them to be in between, but there is room. You could go, 8, 9, 10 just as easily. Skyrush drops to 8, Zadra goes to 9, Iron Rattler stays at 10, or maybe all 3 of them drop. Maybe Iron Rattler drops to 13, and Skyrush drops to 10, and Zadra finds its way in there. So that's where the big question mark is. You kind of have to decide, is the Skyrush at number 5 legit? And me sitting here already seeing what happened in Wicked Cyclone, I would tend to think that it is going to stay at 5. So my decision is Iron Rattler versus Zadra, and I don't even know on that.
Well, and that's where I was going next is, really the only rides that where there's some commonality is Iron Rattler and Zadra both being RMCs. And at least to me, Zadra's got a little bit of length over it. They both got similar heights and speeds. It's got maybe a few more elements to it. It's got some good speed all the way through. It doesn't have that.
And even in the logo, it says it's a wood coaster, so it's got that going for it.
Which is really, really interesting, right?
What the hell?
So, I mean, if you're trying to compare, again, you're the critical thinker, so I'll let you try and answer this. If you were to compare Iron Rattler, which you have ridden, and Zadra, which you've only seen a POV and maybe some off-ride of, what are you doing about those two potentially next to each other?
I would tend to think Zadra's a little bit better based on, because I think Iron Rattler's the stuff that Iron Rattler does well, it does really well. But you got those overbanks. It's one of the early RMCs. You got those stupid overbanks. up on the canyon wall. And I think it kind of slows down the ride at that point, where they're kind of fun, but you could have done something better. Whereas Zadra, I think, follows the Goliath method a little bit more of how to put the ride together. That adds a lot more to it, but you still have like the fun there. So I would tend to think personally Zadra is a better ride than Iron Rattler, but I don't know if this poll is going to say that this year.
Well, I'll say this, Andy. There's a number of people who submitted brackets who have Zadra winning this group.
Well, that's just stupid.
There's a lot of people who took a leap here
and put it over Fury.
Yeah.
Get out
of here. Hey, they're going along with the new ride mentality. I mean, you made a very convincing argument about Velocicoaster a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. Well, we already saw Hyperion take an exit, so I'm not worried about any of that. So, yeah.
You're not worried about the rides from Poland crashing apart.
No, I'm really not. Not until more people get out there. Like I just don't see that happening.
Yeah. Nope, that's fair. All right. So finally, the ranking for the Bollinger group in fourth is Zadra, coming in at fourth. Maybe a surprise to some, maybe not. I don't know. In third is Iron Rattler, staying at number 3 relative in this group. Sky Rush, number 2. And then Fury 325, our winner for the Bollinger group. So we're going to see Steel Vengeance and Fury 325 go up against each other in the final 4 here. But it is Fury 325 moving on, followed by Sky Rush, Iron Rattler, and then Zadra.
Yeah, it's not surprising to me. I won't say that there's a surprise there that happened. I think that makes sense based on what we've seen so far.
Yeah, I think it probably does. And, time will tell, and again, we don't know where Zadra ends up coming in. Again, it could very well end up being a top 10 ride. I mean, Sky Rush, Iron Rattler, Fury, all borderline or definite top 10 rides throughout, the history of this bowl, and at least last year. So it's very possible Zadra ends up in the top 10. This was a very stout group when you think about it in that regard. So we'll have to see. Shall we move on to the other half of our steel bracket here? And we'll get into the other half with the Morgan group. And this is the group that we spent the most time on during the selection show because, we talked a lot about Velocicoaster. We've already done that a little bit tonight. And we talked about the potential of not just Velocicoaster coming out of this, first round and potentially winning this group. You even talked about the potential of Velocicoaster winning the whole thing, which I think is something a lot of people are considering. And then we turned, that sheet of paper over on its other side and talked about rides like G-Force and Terran, who've been perennial top 10 rides. Ride like Nemesis, which has been, a borderline top 10 ride for many years. Helix, which aside from last year, which a lot of people seem to be discounting as an outlier, has been a top 10 ride for many, many years. Medusa Steel Coaster getting ridership, and that it looks like a really, really good RMC. The possibility of that being a top 10 or 12 coaster. This is starting to sound like a Danny Miller top 10 here, where there's
seriously
in it, and where Velocicoaster kind of fits in that mix. Really, Phantom's Revenge and Superman, the only one that we didn't really give much consideration, but there were folks who picked both of those 4 rides to move on out of the first 4 here. So, what are you thinking as far as the 4?
Well, first. Oh, okay. I'll go through my thinking because there's something that's shocking here. I think that I just learned, and maybe I knew this last year, but it's absolutely shocking. I think your top 3 are clear. It's Terran, it's Velocicoaster, it's Expedition G-Force. I think those top 3 are clear. The question is, what do you do with the last spot? And I think common sense would tell you go with Helix. But here's the problem with that. The problem with that is that Helix did not appear in last year's Thrilling 32.
Right.
The year before it was number 5.
Right.
Like you talk about a fall from grace. maybe one of the biggest falls ever in the history of the Thrilling 32, that you were in the top five. Like, I can understand being like 15 and dropping to like 55. Like, nobody cares. But you were in the top 5 and you dropped. Helix dropped to 37? 37? Did I read that correctly?
I believe you did, yes.
37.
Now here's the question. Was that a ridership problem last year? And was last year just an outlier? Because every other year it's been top 5, top 10, right? So is it back there?
I don't know. And I'm surprised we didn't talk about this on the selection show, because this
is... I attempted to, and you just kept talking about Velocicoaster the entire time.
In fairness, probably the right move.
Well, I won't say it was the wrong move, but I mean, I think that's a big thing that a lot of people, and even in the discussions and the comments and whatnot, on the Discord and on YouTube, Helix was one that people were pontificating the most about. To use our vocab word for this episode. I love the word. That's a word that you've used a couple of times. But Helix is the big question mark, because it's like, has Helix fallen from grace and has just come back up a little bit enough to get in, as in like the 20s, or was last year just a complete outlier? Throw it away, don't consider it at all, and now it's back to being a borderline top 5 ride. Because now, if that's the case, now you've got Helix, Terran, and Velocicoaster, 3 rides that are all very similar.
God.
That in theory, if you select the 3 of them to go along with G-Force or another, whatever fucking ride you want to pick to go on, now you've got to try and rank those 3 relative to each other in the second round.
I'm not even thinking about that right now.
You're just trying to figure out who's going on.
I'm trying to figure out Helix 2018, number 7, 2017, number 5. What the hell's going on here? Like,
it is not a mistake that Helix was put in a group with Terran and Velocicoaster. That was absolutely intentional, because we knew that this was a question people would have to think about. And maybe they didn't. Be quite
like Nemesis, Nemesis, Nemesis is probably going to fall into the bottom half of the top 10, maybe right outside the top 10 in your top 15. That's a spot where Nemesis is probably settled over time. So
it's been comfortable there.
So your question is, was last year an outlier? And I don't know. Like, I don't know, because I don't put any stock in any of these other 3 rides moving on into this.
Let's think about this for a minute here, in the context, and perhaps this is how people approach this. Maybe it's not. But when you think about Helix being a top 5 ride, potentially, right? If you truly believe Velocicoaster is also a top 5 ride, you've got to think of rides like Vengeance, Fury, Untamed, which is in the last group, G-Force, which were your top 4 last year, right? So that's 4 right there. Then if you're talking about Helix being a top 10, top 5 ride, you've got to think about Helix. You've got to think about Terran. Nemesis has kind of been there. You've got rides like X2 and Intimidator 305, which are in this last group that we haven't talked about yet. You've got Iron Rattler and Skyrush, which we just talked about in the last group. All of a sudden, that's more than 10 rides right there. So, is it Velocicoaster that doesn't quite have the snuff to make the top 5, top 10? Is it Nemesis that's falling down? Is it Helix that's not in there? Is it Terran that's falling down? Is it another ride, like an Untamed, or is it G-Force falling from grace? Like, all of those things are things you have to consider here if you're trying to convince yourself that Helix is once again a top 5, top 10 ride.
Well, I'm going to use critical thinking is what I do. And I'm going to go back to saying, I think Helix was grossly overranked all those other years. That Helix looks really good. And I think I think when Helix first came out, it was like that first Mack roller coaster, and people were like, "Oh yeah, this looks really cool. The night package looks really cool."
Blue Fire fell out once Helix came on the
Yeah.
scene, right?
And like Blue Fire was always that like golden child of Europe before, and I think,
and then Helix was like, "This is what Mach can actually do."
yeah, and I think Blue Fire became the, hey, look at where I've been coaster. And I think that transferred to Helix then, be like, oh, look at where else I've been now. and it turns,
because it's no longer like hip to have Terran in your top 5 because everyone's ridden it.
Yeah, like so like it's strange. So I think Helix was always grossly overranked. I don't think 37 was the correct ranking on Helix from last year.
Probably needs to be somewhere between those two.
Probably somewhere between those two numbers, between 5 and 37.
Like the 18 to 20 range, seems appropriate.
But if I was to say, is Helix better than Nemesis? I would say probably not. I would say probably Nemesis is probably the better ride.
Well, I mean, it's an inverted coaster built in 1994. It's got to be.
It's hard not good. To. It's hard to beat that year with inverted coasters. It's not the best ride built in 1994. That's for sure.
But it's the best inverted coaster built in 1994. That's for sure.
No. So I'm gonna lean towards Nemesis.
He started back up again.
Yeah, I'm gonna lean hesitantly towards Nemesis.
Okay, so then you're putting Nemesis in. So then your other 3 are what? G-Force, Terran, and Velocicoaster. Yeah. That's where you're going. Okay.
And then we can deal with that problem.
Well, that would be a problem. All right. So moving on from the Morgan group, we do have Expedition G-Force moving on. We do have Terran moving on. We do have Velocicoaster moving on as well. And the last ride moving on from the Morgan group is Nemesis from Alton Towers. So we've knocked out Helix, we've knocked out Medusa Steel Coaster, we've knocked out Phantom's Revenge, and we've knocked out Superman.
I can't wait to hear, like, on the reveal of the top 50, like, it's on borderline number 49.
Yeah, well, right. No, yeah.
Like, exactly. Somebody really has it in for Helix, and we don't know.
Yeah, right. Yeah, how about it? That's it could be the case. We'll see. So Six Flags Mexico, thanks for coming to the party, but your time.
But adios.
Adios. Thanks for playing. Better luck next year. And El Pollo Loco. Okay, so now
it's a good restaurant in Vegas.
Yeah, that's right. So now we've got Expedition G-Force, Nemesis, Terran, and Jurassic World Velocicoaster. So now we've got a whole different set of problems.
But I don't think you do. I don't think you do. And
no.
And one, I think
G-Force was number 2 last year.
Wait, which one was Expedition
G-Force?
Yeah, well, I don't think you have a problem. I don't think you have a problem if you believe in Velocicoaster. So that's what you have to do here. So you have this.
You talked about this in the selection show. You're like Velocicoaster all the way, no question. It's like G-Force was number 2 last year.
Okay, but that's cool. But you either believe in Velocicoaster. So Velocicoaster is that ride. Velocicoaster is kind of like the Terran from a few years ago, or even Untamed, where you either believe it's winning or it's going to be like 7, 8, or 9 something. So there's no sense in even thinking about it. Like, you have to believe in Velocicoaster.
Well, that's the question.
Well, that's the thing, because the other 3 I don't think are changing. I think G-Force, Terran, Nemesis gonna go in that line. And your problem is do you put Velocicoaster as 1, or do you put it? The only other sensible decision then is Velocicoaster versus Nemesis, because if you don't believe that it's, if you're putting G-Force as number 1, then you're probably not going to believe in it that much to put it over Terran. And so then your issue is Nemesis versus Velocicoaster. So you're either putting this really.
This is the Zadra question from the last group all over again.
Yeah, you're either putting it 1 or 4. Well, but no, I didn't have that question. Only fools put it over Fury.
Right, but based on how some of these scores are going, we've got a lot of fools filling out brackets.
So I'm just explaining how fools were thinking incorrectly about the last one. So
I see.
So you either believe in
Continue.
Velocicoaster as 1, or you're probably putting it as 3 or 4. Probably 3 would be my guess. I believe it as in 1. I believe Velocicoaster is, once again, we are now talking about a ride that is not Zadra, because Zadra probably was ridden by a handful of people. We're talking about a ride that has been pretty well ridden. We're talking about a ride that is universally liked.
I see what you did there.
You know, you like that? You like that? And we're also talking about a brand new ride. So will Velocicoaster, you putting it over G-Force, will that be maintained through the next 15 years? Probably not. I think we're going to see a shift and a leveling off probably next year. But this year, absolutely, I believe it's going to be over G-Force, and that it will be going to the finals.
Oh, you think it's going to the finals?
Well, because who else? If it beats G-Force, there's really no other competition here. Fury?
You're wait a minute. You talking about the? I mean, obviously it goes to Final Four, but you mean the championship by finals?
Yeah, it goes to the final matchup. Steel Vengeance Velocicoaster.
So you're not giving any chance to a ride like Untamed.
No, it's 1. It's from Europe. 2, nobody cares. Like you could, like Untamed could even beat G-Force last year. So why would I think?
That's a fair point. If you're gonna put it above G-Force, that's a fair point.
Like I feel like Untamed is already leveled off. So like you're gonna have your Vengeance, because Vengeance is gonna go up against Fury. Probably you're gonna see Velocicoaster going up against whatever comes out the next round, Untamed, possibly. I haven't looked at it yet. And I mean,
we got some good rides over there. We got Untamed, we got Maverick, we've got X2, we've got I-305, we got Twisted Timbers.
Okay,
Andy, you're Silver Star.
So thank you for making my point for me. So, like I feel like you have to make this decision right now. You're either putting Expedition G-Force into the finals, or you're putting Velocicoaster into the finals. That's your choice right now. And I believe in Velocicoaster based on everything you've said.
Plus it has dinosaurs, right?
It's got dinosaurs. Like, come on. It could be the greatest ride ever written.
Well,
I haven't written it yet. So
there are a lot of people, at least the submissions we've gotten to date. Here again, we're still accepting them at the time of this recording. There are quite a number of people who believe in Velocicoaster, at least through this point. There's a lot of people who don't as well.
I think if you're gonna believe in it, you're gonna believe in it through this point. Now I think your real decision comes in with the final matchup with Vengeance and Velocicoaster, but here I absolutely believe in it.
Right, and to be fair, there are not many people who, at least at this point, that have Velocicoaster winning the whole thing. Certainly, a lot of people have it winning this group, but a lot of people have G-Force as well. So I don't know the numbers. I would say it's probably close to a 50-50 split. I don't know the numbers. Maybe I should. I don't know. I knew we would talk about this, so maybe I should have researched that. But it's pretty close to a split. So, anyways, the ranking in the Morgan group. Here we go. In 4th place is Nemesis from Alton Towers. In 3rd place is Terran from Fantasialand. And winning the Morgan group, moving on to the Final Four, is Jurassic World Velocicoaster. It has knocked off the defending runner-up, Expedition G-Force, coming in 2nd in the Morgan group. So Velocicoaster 1, Expedition G-Force 2, Terran 3, and Nemesis 4. So now the game has changed quite a bit here. Because now all of a sudden, if you've got Steel Vengeance winning the whole thing, and you didn't have Velocicoaster winning this group, are you starting to get nervous?
No. I don't know. I think
now if you have Vengeance and Velocicoaster in the finals, which a lot of people do, you're feeling great about how things have gone tonight, because you're probably 3 for 3. You're probably 3 for 3, right?
Well, yeah, and I think at this point, I think common sense will tell you we've seen this storyline play out almost every single year. We've seen it play out with Untamed. We've seen it play out on the wood side a number of times, and it's the same story. We keep saying this, that new coasters tend to do well in this poll. And the question is not so much of does it get to number one, but can it knock off number one? It probably will get to number two, but will it knock off number one is the big question. So I think most of the people, if you believed in the hype of Velocicoaster already, then you should be at this point.
Yeah, and again, there's quite a number of people who had G-Force winning and Velocicoaster being second in this group. So if you are a person who has Steel Vengeance and either Untamed or Expedition G-Force in your finals and had Velocicoaster second in this group, I think you're probably feeling nervous all of a sudden that Velocicoaster has knocked off G-Force. Because now you're kind of in this, G-Force was number two. I don't know. I didn't have Velocicoaster moving on. But if you had Velocicoaster and Steel Vengeance both winning, and then Fury, obviously I think most people had Fury winning that group. There were a couple people who had Zadra. But I mean, if you're one that had both Vengeance and Velocicoaster in the finals, which was a common finals matchup in the submissions that we've gotten to this point, I think you're feeling great about how this night has gone for you so far.
Yeah. I honestly.
All right. So regardless of who your champion is, because at that point, you're probably thinking it's a coin flip, do or die with whichever one you pick. So now we move on to the Shilky group, our final group of the evening here to get our final four coaster. We had Behemoth, we had Intimidator 305, former champion. We have Maverick from Cedar Point. We have Silver Star from Europa Park, Twisted Colossus, Twisted Timbers, Untamed, former runner-up to Steel Vengeance in 2019, and then X2 from Six Flags Magic Mountain. So, again, we talked in this selection show, we've got a little bit of everything. We've got a couple B&M hypers, got a couple of RMCs, couple of Intamins, we got X2. So we've got a little bit of everything in this group, and quite frankly, a pretty stout group. Intimidator 305, the only former champion here, but it feels to me, based on the way that people predicted this group, and also about the way we've been talking about the trends of a lot of the rides in this group, even though Intimidator 305 is the only coaster in this group that has won the Thrilling 32 before, it doesn't feel like it's the shoe-in to win the group.
I don't even makes it past the first four. So you can immediately dump Behemoth and Silver Star out of this group. So you're talking about the other six coasters. And
so which ones are you definitely putting in then?
I think you can definitely put in Untamed. I think you can definitely put in Maverick based on the trends we've seen. And
you're hesitating on that, but I think I agree with you.
Yeah, because it's like Maverick bounces around a little bit, but we've seen an upward trend with Maverick. I think you can put in X2. And I think then you have to start deciding. Because Intimidator, we've seen a big drop. Intimidator last year was ranked number 11. Yes. Was ranked 11.
Where was Twisted Timbers last year?
So Maverick was 7, X2 was 8, so they're right next to each other. Untamed was 4.
That does not bode well for the second part of this.
No, so Untamed, Maverick, X2, Intimidator 305 was 11, Twisted Timbers was 12. Twisted Colossus was 16. So still in that discussion a little bit. I think it's safe to say Twisted Colossus is probably outside looking in. The only thing I could say that maybe Intimidator has fallen even more and Twisted Colossus is maintaining. I don't
Colossus has 16's a little low for that one historically in our poll.
Yeah. I would think you're looking at Maverick, X2, Untamed, and your choices between I-305 and Twisted Timbers. And looking at previous polls isn't going to help you because, once again, 11, 12 from last year, and then we know I-305's been on this slide down.
Yeah.
So
this is almost a trend decision as opposed to a ranking decision.
Yeah, because I think the rankings here doesn't help you because 2019
X2's been on an upswing, as has Maverick.
2019 i305 was 8. 2018 i305 was 9. So we kind of see it settling in at that 8 to 10 range.
In 2018, when it was 9, where were Maverick and X2?
2018 Maverick was 8 and X2 was 10. So Maverick i305 X2 down the line, 8, 9, 10.
Oh wow. And Twisted Timbers opened that year, and wasn't Twisted Timbers 5 that year?
5, but that's the first year,
right?
You know, so I don't think you can use that either. So I honestly believe that you can pencil in Untamed, and I think you can pencil in Maverick and X2 based on trends. Even then, I think now looking at these numbers, I think even those might be a little on shaky ground. And I think it's really a coin flip between i305 and Twisted Timbers.
That's the battle of the King's Dominion rides too.
Yeah, honestly.
Which, I'll be honest with you, Andy. Again, the submissions we've gotten here, a lot of folks with Untamed, Maverick, and X2, and then very, very, nearly split on the fourth one between i305, Twisted Timbers, and some having Twisted Colossus. There were some folks who had both Twisted Timbers and Twisted Colossus and chose to leave either Maverick or X2 out altogether.
That was dumb.
And then the rankings becomes a whole different discussion in a minute.
Yeah, well, let's see what happens here first.
All right, so moving on from the Shilky group, we do have Untamed, we do have Maverick, we do have X2, and the last one moving on is Intimidator 305. So i305 does hang on. i305, Maverick, Untamed, and X2. So we've eliminated Behemoth, Silver Star, Twisted Colossus, and Twisted Timbers. So now we've figured out who the favorite of the King's Dominion coasters is, anyways. Volcano the Blast coaster, obviously.
Wow.
But working out. So we've got i305, Maverick, Untamed, and X2. And now the ranking of this, and I'll pose this question. Untamed took a damn good shot at 2019 at Steel Vengeance, right? Didn't quite pull off the upset, didn't quite win. Then I think in 2020 dropped to 3. Was it 3?
Was 4 in 2020.
Okay, so it was behind a Fury and then G-Force, which were 2, 3, and then Untamed was 4. And then last year, Expedition G-Force and Fury flip-flopped at the 2, 3 spot, and Untamed was at 4. Is that how it worked out?
Yes.
Okay. And then, so where was Maverick last year?
So Maverick last year was 7.
Okay, so Untamed
was 4.
Has dropped down to 4. Maverick 7, X2 8. Did you say?
i305 11.
Okay, so they're all very tight. And does Untamed continue to fall a little bit?
But here's the thing. So if you go back previous years, and I only go back going back too far is too much information. It's always been Maverick i305 X2. It's always been that order down the line. Because you're talking about Untamed, and I think Untamed is the wrong one to focus on in this group. I think Untamed is your number one, barring some weird Maverick jumping up to the top 4, which I don't think is going to happen here.
Okay.
I think we've been seeing the rise of Maverick, but I think we're hitting the wall of Maverick too now.
You think we're there?
I think we're there. I think we've hit
all right,
plus or minus. Like it's going to start bouncing around this bottom half of the top 10, which is cool. I'm okay with that. I think it's still underranked, but I'm cool with that idea. I think Untamed is going to be clearly your number one out of this group. So the question becomes, what are the other 3? And it's always been Maverick i305 X2, except for last year, where i305 dropped down under X2. So your question you have to answer is does that order stay the same? And I think Maverick fills into your number 2 spot pretty clearly. I don't see any reason why X2 would jump up all of a sudden over Maverick, having never beaten it like in the last 5 years. So I don't see why that would have changed this year. The question is, does I-305 stay under X2 or does it jump back up over X2? And I don't know, like, I just don't see it jumping up. I think I-305 is one of those rides where as more stuff opens up, I think people realize that I-305 has a lot of issues. So I would go down the line, Untamed, Maverick, X2, I-305.
Okay. And I think that's a pretty fair assessment of how you would work this one out. And again, these are all very, very close to one another. I mean,
because if you look at it, I-305 is dropping, whereas the other two are still rising ever so slightly.
In general, yes.
So, like, X2 was the...
You know what would be interesting, and I don't know how we would do this with all of the rides, but it would be interesting, and maybe this is something I'm going to do at some point. I'd love to see, and I mean, I'd be the one who would have to make it. I'd love to see a line chart of like how the rides have done in comparison to one another, where you could actually visualize the trends. You know what I mean? Like each year, and it becomes.
I can tell you how to do it. A line graph with multiple lines of different colors.
Well, yeah, that's how you would have to do it. The only issue is how many shades of red are you going to have? You probably need to make it.
I don't think you do it for all the rides. I think you pick the top 10 and just track 10 of them, or maybe the top 15. There's no reason to do all 32.
No, that's probably a good, because that's something that visually, if I was trying to predict.
Because if I want to throw something at my screen, like for Wicked Cyclone, I'll just do that on my own time. Like, and plus, then you're like, you will have some outliers with Helix and stuff, which will be weird. But yeah, I get your idea.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, I mean, it's really the top 10 that are most important, because those are the ones that you're going to see going through the.
Yeah, and some rides drop in and out of the top 10. That's why I said do like the top 15, because.
Because I mean, in general, the top 10 to 15, they're making up the majority of this second round where you've got to rank them.
Yeah.
So. All right, so you were going with what? Untamed, Maverick, X2, I-305. Is that the order?
Yeah, I'm going to stick with last year.
All right. Well, coming in at number 4 is Intimidator 305. Coming in at number 3 is X2. Coming in at number 2 is Maverick, and of course, the winner of the Shilky group is Untamed from Wallaby Holland. So we've got our final 4 set now. We've got Steel Vengeance going up against Fury 325, and we've got Jurassic World Velocicoaster going up against Untamed. So, a fair number of people coming to this conclusion. In general, Andy, I will say, in general, a good number of people came to this final 4. The big one that some people didn't have, obviously, is Expedition G-Force over Velocicoaster. That's the big one that if you were to swap one out, where people had 3 out of 4, that's the big one you would swap out. However, I will say the journey to get to that final 4 was very, very turbulent for the vast majority of people.
Yeah, I don't.
And we saw why, right? Because there were a number of groups where you had some minute rankings, Skyrush, Iron Rattler, even X2, Maverick, I-305, not knowing how some of those new rides like Hyperion, Zadra, Fly, etc., the placement of Helix, what people were going to do there. So a very, very turbulent ride to get to our final 4 here this year.
I don't know how easy it was to get here. I know there's probably a lot of pulling of the hair and some headaches coming out at the end of this, and probably a fair number of people just saying, okay, whatever, I'm submitting this.
Yeah.
I feel like that's probably how a lot of this went, and I understand it.
The Pryanosis on the Discord, he said the same thing just the other day. He said, I'm not confident in my choices at all, but here goes nothing, submit.
Well, even Robert Raptor at some point said, I'm done with this, pretty much after the second round, though. So that's... He lost his attention span real quickly.
Now, was that during the wood coasters or the steel
That was
coasters?
during the wood coasters. I probably
Okay,
should have started him out with the main event in the steel because.
Well, he might have taken a nap by the time he got to the wood coasters.
Well, that's exactly what he did do, was take a nap during the wood coasters, which I don't blame him for. So it makes sense.
Must have been riding the beast.
I think now at this point with these final fours both set, I think there's a lot of question marks still, maybe only in the championship round. So maybe the final four round isn't as exciting as maybe we're used to this year at least.
Yeah, so our once again, our Steel Final Four, we've got Steel Vengeance going up against Fury 325, battle of former champions. Actually, the two most recent champions, obviously the defending champ and the previous champ in Fury 325, all the way back from 2017. And then we've got Velocicoaster and Untamed in our other matchup. And then a reminder, our Wood Final Four from last year, or from last week, we've got Voyage going up against Gold Striker, and we've got Lightning Rod going up against Wildfire from Cole Martin. I think a lot of people might have forgotten that Wildfire did make it to the Final Four from last week. So those are your Final Fours. So next week, we will be going through and revealing the winners of those four matchups. We'll get it down to our championship matchups in both brackets, and then hopefully 2 weeks from today, our championship matchups, our finalists will go head to head. We'll find out who is winning the wood, who is winning the steel. We'll find out who wins the bracket contest, the Thrilling 32 bracket challenge here in the 10th anniversary of the Thrilling 32, and finally we'll reveal the top 50 rankings list for both the wood and steel. So we'll finally get to see where all of these rides actually ranked once we find out who has come out on top. Andy, any final thoughts before we sign off for tonight?
No, I'm tired.
I bet you are. I am too.
So, as always, thank you for joining us here on this wonderful Coaster Rumble. I'm, of course, Andrew Barchak from Chicago, Illinois.
I'm Danny Miller from Binghamton, New York.
Right on, Ride Warriors.
See you guys next week.